Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a recent reads video for you. It's been a really busy week this week. We had summer school, which was just like a full-on week of lectures, and I also handed in my final essays for the year, so I'm a little bit tired today. The pollen's been really bad, so my sinuses are quite blocked, and I also had my first vaccine dose this morning. Whoop whoop. So I am feeling a little bit dopey, but I wanted to film this video today because I have got to the point where I have 9 books to talk about, and I probably wouldn't have time tomorrow, and I didn't want to wait until I'd finished a 10th book because I don't know how soon I'll get an opportunity to film again. I'm going to visit my parents this week, so I'm going to have a lot of time for reading and we'll finish a ton more books, and I didn't want to have loads of books to talk about. I wanted to keep it quite brief. A lot of the books I'm going to be talking about today I'm not going to talk loads about because a number of them were ones I was reading for uni. The other reason I wanted to film today was because I've got my great new t-shirt on, which I wore it today because it's fun, and I wanted to wear something that hopefully might make the people doing the vaccine stuff smile a little bit, but it also makes me smile. And so as I'm wearing it today, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to do some filming and show it off because I love it. So that's all my reasons. If I'm a little bit all over the place, it's why So without any more preamble, let's just get on with the books. So I mentioned I've got 9 books to talk about today that I've read in about the last 2 weeks really. A lot of them were quite short. Some of the ones that I picked up with like uni related things were quite short, so that's how I've managed to get through quite a lot of them. And then a couple of them, actually, to be fair, I have been reading for a little while and I finally got through them. Yeah, I'm going to talk about them. Some of them I'm not going to talk about very much, some of them I'm going to talk about a bit more. I'm going to preface this whole thing by saying I probably am not going to be giving content warnings as I go through for books because I don't necessarily remember them all. The ones I need to give them for today probably have quite a lot of things. If I remember any, I might say them, but what I will do is I'll link to the Book Trigger Warnings website. Because it's community compiled, there'll be more of the content warnings on there than I would probably remember. I also really recommend Storygraph if you are wanting to try a different book tracking site to Goodreads. I've been using Storygraph recently and I really like it, and it does also have the option to add content warnings when you review a book, so that if anyone else is looking to find out more about a book, they can see those content warnings. So I really recommend looking at that, but there will be links to the Book Trigger Warnings website for any of these books that have pages on that site. Oh, I will also say actually that most of these books I either read as ebooks or I borrowed from the library, or a couple of them my copies are in my study. So for most of these books I'm going to be putting a picture up because I don't actually have the physical book. Okay, so the first book I'm going to talk about today is Legend Bond by Tracy Deonn. So this is a young adult fantasy. It is set in North Carolina and it is inspired by Arthurian legend, which I didn't know when I started reading it. So once I got over the fact that a very British myth and legend had been transposed into a modern American setting, I actually really enjoyed this book. I was kind of loosely buddy reading this with Lana from Lore and Lullabies, only I was writing essays and reading other things at the same time, so it took me a little while to get through it. She actually finished it quicker than me. But I really loved it by the end of the book, and I really got very drawn into the story and ended up giving it 5 stars. So it took me a little while to get into it, but once I did I really loved it. I found some elements of the plot were a little bit predictable, but in a good way. So I've worked out a few of the twists, and a few of them I didn't figure out as well, so that was really fun. I really loved the exploration of the different kinds of magic systems. So as I said, part of it was inspired by Arthurian legend and there was a sort of specific magic system inspired by that, but there was also an exploration of rootcraft as an African-American practice, and how the central character was kind of the apex of several different types of magic, which she is gradually uncovering as she goes through the book. I thought this was a really fun book. I really enjoyed this. The main character is called Bree, and the impetus for the story, what gets it going, is her mother's recently been killed in a car accident, and she has started this kind of high school program at a nearby university where she's going kind of hoping to feel more in touch with her mother, who had been a student at that university in the past. So she's struggling with a complicated kind of grief and trying to deal with this traumatic experience, and then she finds that there are kind of demons infiltrating the college, and she gets caught up with a secret society who are the descendants of Arthur in the Knights of the Round Table, and they have magic abilities that have passed through their bloodline. So she's trying to figure out where she fits in all this, starts to realise that she has her own magic and can't really work out how it all fits together. There were so many great elements to this book that I really, really loved. I'm trying to convince my friend to read it because parts of it have kind of like early days of Supernatural kind of vibe. I didn't get on very well with Supernatural. I watched a couple of seasons and then it just got a bit too intense for me. But in the early days, when it was like there was a lot more humour and a lot of fun in it before it got too dark, it kind of had that similar vibe. So that's how I tried to sell it to my friend. There was kind of a quite a sweet romance storyline. There was some really interesting diverse characters, and so there are a lot of great elements to this plot, and the exploration of mental illness I thought was handled really well as well. Yeah, loads of great things about this book. It's one that I really do recommend, and I gave it 5 stars. Okay, so the next 2 books I'm not really going to talk a lot about, I'm just going to quickly mention them. They were both ones that I picked up vaguely for uni related stuff. So the first one was called Liturgy and Spiritual Formation by Carolyn Headley. This was for an essay I was writing about liturgy and its purpose. Liturgy, if you're not familiar with it, is kind of the practices that we use in church. In a stricter sense of the word, it refers to like formal written language that we repeat in a lot in services, but actually it's a bit more practical than that. It's just about the kinds of things that make up a church service. If you do them regularly, that's liturgy. So this was a kind of introduction to some of the stuff to do with that I needed to read for an essay. It was only very short. The next one that I finished was called Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. This was a book that we were actually all given when we moved into our community house. For those of you who don't know, I live on site at the college that I'm training at, and there are about 20 of us in a house together, which can be a little bit overwhelming at times. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian. He's a really interesting character actually. He was living and working in Germany in the 1930s and ended up kind of getting involved in a plot to kill Hitler, which didn't succeed. And so he was arrested, but he wrote quite a lot both before that and while he was in prison before he was executed about ethics and theology. And so this book is only quite a short volume about living in community as Christians, so that's why we were given it. It helped a little bit with some other of my essays as well, and it was just quite an interesting little read, so I quite like that one. The next book I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail, but not loads more, because it was the 4th book in a series. I read A Sky Beyond the Storm by Saba Tahir. This is the final book in the Ember Quartet. If you saw my TBR, you may remember that I hadn't been able to renew it at the library, and so I only had a few days in which to try and fit it in, and I managed to read this in like basically 3 days, I think. And it was over 500 pages, so I was pretty happy with that. It was quite a quick read. I'm not going to say an easy read because there's a lot of stuff happens in these books. In one of my recent reads videos, I talked quite a lot about the build-up, the outline of these stories, because I was talking about the 3rd book, which I just finished. So I'm not going to go into massive amounts of detail about the book, particularly because it's the 4th one in the series. The series as a whole follows 3 central characters, and it's set in kind of a Roman-like empire. One of the main characters, Lyra, she's from an oppressed people called the Scholar class, and in the early books she's trying to free her brother who has been imprisoned by the martial class. There's Elias, who is training to be a mask, who are kind of the elite fighting force of the marshals, and he and Helen are put into this kind of competition to try and find the next emperor. So that all happens in the 1st book, and then the other books build on from that. This was a really great climax to the story. So much stuff happens in these books, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but just the build up through the first 3 books. This I actually think was my favourite out of all of the series. I thought it was a really great finale to the story, tied up all of the storylines, just some really emotional stuff happens, and I really did enjoy the series. I think overall I'd give the series 4 out of 5 stars. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I think most of the books have been kind of 3.5, 4 stars. I'm not sure if it's a series I'd reread. I've been borrowing them from the library, and maybe at some point I might buy copies and read them again, but I really enjoyed reading the series, and it's definitely one that I would recommend if you like quite violent YA fantasy. Yeah, there were a couple of things about like the world building and the magic system that didn't entirely always make sense, but some of those threads did become clearer in this final book, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. The next one is not one I'm going to talk loads about because I have reviewed it on my my blog, so if you're interested in finding more of my thoughts about that, go and check that out, and at some point I might do a video review of it if I have another book that's on a similar theme. So this was called Thy Geekdom Come, Volume 2, and this was edited by Allison Alexander, so it's a collection of 42 kind of short essays which link a story from the Bible with kind of fandom, and it was really fun. I really loved this book, so I read one a day roughly over the last kind of 6 weeks, and I really enjoyed this. So I had this as a advanced copy from the publisher who are called Mythos and Ink, and I think this book was released in April sometime, I can't remember exactly. I thought this was really clever. It's the kind of thing I really love. I love trying to find comparisons between my favourite fandoms and stuff I read in the Bible, and so this brought a lot of that together. Some of the stuff was familiar to me, some of the fandoms were ones that I would say I was a part of, things like Star Trek, there was one about The Good Place, there was one about Out of the Silent Planet, which is the first book in the Space Trilogy, which I've been reading recently, so that was really cool. And some things that I'd never come across, like there were quite a few that were about anime or manga, which is not something I really know a lot about. A few were about video games as well, and I'm not really a gamer, but I really enjoyed hearing other people talk about their fandoms and relating them to their faith. So if you want more of my thoughts on that, go and check out my review on my blog, and yeah, maybe at some point there'll be a video review as well. The next book I'm going to talk very briefly about was called Ghost Ship by Azariah France Williams. This is a book about institutional racism within the church in the UK, specifically the Church of England. Azariah France Williams actually led a seminar at my college last autumn, I think it was, or maybe winter, I can't remember exactly, but it was really interesting. So I've been meaning to pick up his book since then, and I actually got it out from our college library. And then recently there was a BBC short documentary panorama about the same issue, and so I watched that and I was kind of, oh, I really need to read that book. So I read it, and it was really interesting and really challenging for me as someone who's training to be a priest in the Church of England, to see kind of some of the issues that people of colour have experienced in trying to do what I'm doing, trying to become priests and leaders in the church. So it gave me a lot to think about, and yeah, I will be getting my own copy at some point and will reread it, because I think it's a really important thing as a future church leader to be considering how we can make churches more inclusive and more accessible to people of different backgrounds and different colours and different sexualities and different genders and different experiences, different life experiences, different classes as well. The Church of England tends to be quite white male, middle class, heterosexual, cisgendered. Asking questions about how can we be more diverse, how can we encourage people to feel safe within our churches are really important questions that a lot of people in churches are asking at the moment. So this is a really important book. The next book that I finished was called Moxie by Jennifer Matthew. I read this because I watched the film a couple of months ago when it came out on Netflix, and I hadn't realised it was a book, and I managed to get this out from the library. I've actually just taken it back today, and I really loved this. I'm not going to talk about it loads now because I am going to be doing a page-to-picture review today for that, where I'm going to compare the book and the film, but because that will be quite spoilery, I will give you some non-spoilery thoughts now. This is the story of Vivian Carter, who I'm not entirely sure how American school system works, but she's like maybe a junior in high school. She's 16, so she's among the younger age group at her high school, and she suddenly realises that it's really misogynistic. She's inspired by her mother, who was a riot girl in the 90s, who was part of a radical feminist group, to start a zine, which is just like a little newsletter that she delivers anonymously around the school, challenging some of the misogyny she sees. And it starts a movement among the girls, helps her build friendships, and starts to challenge this misogynistic culture. And I really love this. Obviously I would. If you know anything about me, you know that I am quite feminist. I thought this was absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars in the end, I think. It wasn't quite a perfect book for me, but I really did love it. I watched the film again last night, and the film was just brilliant as well. So if you want to know more of what I think about both the book and the film, look out for that page-to-picture comparative review. Yeah, I really loved that. I really loved the exploration of friendships and how having a cause can challenge and develop those friendships, and I thought some of the stuff was handled really well, but I'm not going to say any more about that now because I'm going to talk about it more in that review, either coming soon or already available. The next book that I finished is actually the only one I have physically here with me. It's The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. I picked this up because I'm currently reading That Hideous Strength, which is the final book in the Space Trilogy, as part of the Space Trilogy read-along hosted by Victoria from A Musical Bookworm. One of the other panellists, I can't remember who it was though, suggested this was a good book to read alongside That Hideous Strength. This is kind of the non-fiction one where C.S. Lewis goes a little bit deeper into the ideas he's exploring in That Hideous Strength, which is in a novelistic form. I mean, this was quite dense and I'd have to reread it because I'm not entirely sure I fully understood everything he's saying, but it's kind of about the worship of science and objectivity and kind of the flaws in that school of thought and what he sees as the end point if you go down that road. And as I'm reading That Hideous Strength, actually I'm seeing some of the clarification of that come through. Sometimes these big ideas do come across more clearly in a novel setting, which is what I'm finding. So I will reread this at some point, but it has helped me a little bit with understanding what's going on in That Hideous Strength, and That Hideous Strength is helping me understand a bit more some of the concepts that he goes into in this book. I've got this really weird big A4 size edition. I don't particularly like it, so if I ever see a nice little neat paperback to match my other C.S. Lewis paperbacks in a charity shop, I will be getting it. But this was all I could get online at short notice. I thought this was really good. It's one of the more dense C.S. Lewis non-fictions, but I'm glad to have read it, and it's definitely one I will be rereading. And if you do decide to read the Space Trilogy, I do agree that this goes really well with That Hideous Strength. And then the final book I'm going to talk about today very briefly was another one I picked up kind of for uni, which is called The Wounded Healer by Henri Nouwen. My housemate lent this to me, and she actually lent it to me for an essay I wrote a little while ago, which was related to trauma theology, and I didn't actually manage to read it in time for writing that essay, but I have read it now, and it did help with a couple of the other essays I've been writing recently. It was really interesting. Henri Nouwen is one of my favourite theologians. He was a Catholic priest. In this, he explores how to help people in crisis, how to help people who are struggling, and kind of pastoral care, how to work with people and support them through difficult times, and how to do that when you are struggling yourself. I ended up giving it 4 stars. It's not my favourite thing of his that I've read, but I really did enjoy it, and I definitely would reread it in the future. I don't really have a lot more to say about it than that. So I think I'm going to stop there. I realise I have rattled through quite quickly on a lot of these books, but there were quite a lot I wanted to get through, and I didn't want to take a lot of time over that. Quite a few of these were for uni, and I'm assuming people don't want to hear in that much detail about dense theology books I'm reading, but if you do, then let me know, because I probably could talk a lot more about them. But yes, read some really good stuff recently, and I'm just like, I was talking to my housemate this morning when we were going to get our vaccines, and like, she loves reading as well, but she's just really struggled to read anything outside of the stuff we have to read for our classes, whereas I'm just like, books are my happy place at the moment. When I've been really struggling with like writing assignments and whatever, picking up like kind of trashy YA fantasy, not trashy, I mean, I don't like that term, just like an easy to read YA fantasy just is pure escapism for me. And particularly if I've been staring at a computer screen all day, I don't really want to start like watching TV or stuff in the evening, so picking up YA books in the evening has just kind of kept me going, really. Anywho, I think that's all I've got to say for today, so let me know if you've read any of these books or what you thought of them. Let me know some of what you've been reading recently. If you'd like to leave me an emoji, then let's go for I'm going to say, in honour of Ghost Ship, which was a book that really impacted me a lot. Let's either go for a ghost or a ship emoji to let me know that you have got this far, or if you can't think of anything you want to say and just let me know that you've been here, then yep, a ghost or a ship emoji would be really fun. You can also like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also follow me on my social medias. I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Goodreads, and I'm on Storygraph. We also have a Space Sirens Discord if you want to chat to me and any of my Space Sirens friends about stuff. We often have like buddy reads and stuff going on in there, so check that out too. All of that information is listed in the description box below for you. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!